So I am on good authority. Actually, no, I've listened to the talks. They're brilliant. So we are looking at a series of I am, knowing the I am, sayings that Jesus used to describe himself, really, who he was, to give us a bit of a picture of his identity, who he is, for us to give it kind of a bit of a picture. And this evening, we are looking at I am the Good Shepherd. Now, just kind of to set the scene, I'm not going with sort of blonde-haired, panpipe playing, little shepherd boy type vibe. Because I was thinking, I was like, oh, Good Shepherd, that's quite a nice, sweet little image. I was like, it's really not. Shepherds were people who fought bears and lions. I don't think, they were meek and mild and played panpipes all the time. So we're going hardcore shepherds tonight. But we're using John chapter 10. Got it here. So John chapter 10. And just starting at the beginning of that chapter, Jesus says this. He says, "Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber." I'm just going to pause there because I want to put in a little bit of context. Jesus has been having a bit of a run-in with the Pharisees for the last 3 chapters. In chapter 7, people have been starting to go, is this the Messiah? Is this the one that we've been waiting for? But it's not what they expect it to look like. And so the Pharisees aren't very impressed. And he's not doing things the way they think he should. He's kind of saying things that are a bit controversial. And he keeps challenging them. And they're not happy. And then in the following chapter, we've got the story of the woman caught in adultery. And you've got this so-called Messiah type figure who is getting involved with very questionable people and, is saying, actually, I forgive you. And humiliating them publicly in many ways. He also says that they're slaves, that they're not real descendants of Abraham, which was challenging like everything they stood for. And then in chapter 9, he heals a man who's been born blind, but he does it on the Sabbath. He could have done it any day, but he does it on the Sabbath, and you're not meant to do work, which it constituted as. And do you know what I love about the story? That particular story is he heals the man by mixing together mud and spit and puts it on his eyes. And there is some slightly weird law that said that was one of the things you could not do on the Sabbath. Quite why it's there, I'm not sure, but it is. And Jesus kind of really intentionally is out to provoke people or create a bit of something, do a bit of stirring. Jesus isn't in kind of I'm out to make peace with everyone. He's out to make a bit of a statement, I guess. I was reading, the other day, I was reading the story of, when Jesus turns over the tables in the temple. And I was reading that to Caleb, who's my 4-year-old son. And I was suddenly like, I don't feel very comfortable reading this story. We're trying to teach good behavior and not throwing things and not hitting. And here's Jesus going and throwing tables. So we kind of skirted quite quickly over that one. But Jesus isn't always meek and mild. He gets angry and he gets really upset and cross and vocal, actually, about the things that he thinks are wrong and he thinks are unjust. And this is the context of where he sets this story, this kind of who he's saying he is. So he's starting off speaking to the Pharisees really clearly. I'll read that first verse again from chapter 10. "Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber." So he's speaking to them and using terms like thief and robber. And as he goes on to talk about being a shepherd, verse 2 says, "The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice." This would have started to bring up images for them. There's a passage in Ezekiel that talks about shepherds. And Ezekiel chapter 34 it says this: the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? And then it goes on to list all the things that they're not doing for the flock and all the things that they are doing for themselves. And it's kind of you're doing a really rubbish job. It's not a nice passage. And then it goes on to talk about the fact that God will send a shepherd to save the flock of Israel. And so as Jesus begins to talk about the concept of shepherds and the fold of sheep, it probably would have started to stir uncomfortable images, uncomfortable feelings, because they knew that Jesus had it in for them. So this is our setting, probably a slightly awkward social situation, bit of controversy. People would have been aware of the tensions of going, oh, what's going to happen next? But Jesus says this, so the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. And I want to give you, if we've got a picture of a sheepfold, hopefully. Here we go. So this is an old sheepfold. And the gap is where the gate would have been. And now it's actually really interesting. So what would have happened is all the shepherds from the local area would all have brought their sheep into this fold. So it wasn't just one shepherd, but there would have been several. And they'd have all come to the fold. And then one person would have kind of slept in the gateway to keep them safe. And the rest probably would have gone off to get a beer, or have a bit of a sleep somewhere else. Or some might have slept in the fold with the sheep. But it was many shepherds coming together. And then in the morning, the shepherds would come back and they would call their sheep out of the fold. And the sheep knew their shepherd's voice. So Joe Bloggs' sheep would have come out for Joe Bloggs. And I can't think of any other random names, but Bill's sheep would have come out for Bill, and Ted's sheep would have come out for Ted. They knew who their shepherd was. And I love that because it kind of gives a little bit more understanding of what Jesus is trying to say here. Because he then goes on to say, in verse 3, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listens to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. So the sheep know the voice of the shepherd. And it's not just, oh, that's a nice voice, I recognize it. There's a purpose in them knowing the shepherd's voice. The sheep have to be able to recognize the shepherd to go with the right shepherd for the system all to work. Otherwise, everyone's sheep will get muddled up and we've got some kind of economic crisis probably. But it's important that each sheep recognizes the shepherd's voice. And the other thing that I love is they must have got to know the shepherd's voice, which meant that somewhere out on the hills, this shepherd was chatting to his sheep. Because the sheep recognizes their shepherd's voice. And it's a really lovely image that the shepherd is speaking to his sheep, whether they're listening to him or not. But they get to recognize his voice. And God is speaking to us already. I think sometimes we go, okay, come on, God, you've got to speak to us. Do you know what? I think God is actually already speaking to us if we will listen. And as we listen, we do get to know our shepherd's voice. So we've got this image of the sheep in their sheepfold, and that's where they go at night to be protected. And we carry on. So in verse 4 of chapter 10, it says, when he's brought out all of his own, so when the shepherd has brought out all his own sheep, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. And the other thing that happened is as the sheep came in and out of the fold each night, is the shepherds would check their sheep. That was when they would spot if any had got injured, if any was sick, if any was missing. So it was a real important point. The shepherd took note of each individual sheep as it went in and out. Each sheep mattered. And Jesus says, all who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And that's a verse we probably know really well, that final verse. The thief comes to steal, kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And it's an incredible verse, and it's a really incredible promise of God. But I wonder how much of us actually feel like it's real. How many of us feel like we actually live life to the full? Sometimes life just feels really busy or really hard work, or sometimes, hard and dark, and there's things that get us down, and kind of living life to the full feels like quite a long way away. There's times when, you just want to run away, to get away from all the stuff and all the things that have to be done and the never-ending lists. And I think if I feel like that sometimes, and I've got a job that I love, I've got a family that I love and who are incredible, and I've got so much, if I feel like that, then surely we all feel like that. I mean, if it's just me, then you can all pray for me later. But I'm sure we all have those moments. But Jesus says that we are able to have life and have it in its fullness. And if we take that verse by itself, then it's kind of an abstract verse. But if we look at the next verse, verse 11, it says this: I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And I was thinking, I don't know if you all heard when David spoke a few weeks ago, and he was talking about Romans 11 and Hebrews 11 even, I think it was, Hebrews 11. But the fact that it's really important to take kind of chunks of the Bible, not just sort of random verses here and there, and get a bit of context of what God is saying. And actually, if you do that here, suddenly it begins to make sense. If you take verse 10 by itself, saying Jesus can give us life and life in all its fullness, that's great, but it's kind of just there. Well, that's a nice idea, but how does that happen? But Jesus goes on to say, I am the good shepherd. The two are linked. The good shepherd is the one who can bring us to that fullness of life. And I guess this is our key. We're talking about the good shepherd. And the thing I love about each of these sayings is it starts with I am. And James talks wonderfully about kind of what that phrase means. It is the name of God, who God identifies himself. That word that we say Yahweh for, I am who I am, that this is the divine God. And this is who Jesus is declaring he is. But he doesn't just leave it there. He couples it with an image. And so firstly he says, I am good, or I am the good shepherd. And the word good, in my head, I was thinking good, it's kind of like nice. It's a bit insipid sometimes. I am good. Was a good cup of tea. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't always carry a great connotation with it. It's nice. But the word good actually is the Greek word kalos. And it doesn't just mean kind of good, nice. In the translation that I found, it said it can also mean beautiful, excellent, precious, surpassing, admirable, magnificent, honorable, and beauty that comes from nobleness and beauty of heart. Like, that's kind of a different take on good. This is who Jesus is. Jesus is beautiful and excellent and precious and admirable and magnificent and honorable. And his beauty comes from his nobleness and purity of heart. This is who he is. And it reminded me of the verse in Philippians 4, verse 8, when Paul says, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And that real sense of goodness and wholeness and purity. And we so need to carry that. It's so easy, isn't it, in the world that we live in, for things to feel a bit dark sometimes and hard. Now, you guys probably all know, but I do a lot of work with Support of the Cavern, and I love it, and it is the most incredible privilege. But sometimes it can be hard. Like people who you kind of go, is there hope? Where is the hope? Like, how do we make any way in this? But we were away on holiday last week and kind of just chatting to God about it. And he was just reminding me that he is always good, like really good, this kind of good. And that never changes, no matter how dark things look, no matter how hard things look, no matter how low we feel. God is always good. And when we fix our eyes on him, we will be able to carry that into those dark places. So we've got I am the good and then shepherd. And the thing I love about this image is it really combines the divine of Jesus saying I am with a shepherd who was like the ordinary of ordinaries. And we kind of know from the nativity story that shepherds were kind of used to represent the sort of the bottom, you know. They were the mucky people out with the sheep. And Jesus saying, this is who I am. Yes, I am divine. Yes, I am God. But I am also here in the midst of the ordinariness. And then as John writes this, he does this really good thing. So in verse 11, he says, I am the good shepherd. And then he says it again, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And that's not a coincidence that he wrote that phrase twice. When people wrote things more than once, it was generally because they wanted you to get it. They were wanting to provide emphasis. So he's saying, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. He is the good shepherd. He is this divine God who is excellent and extraordinary, but he has also come into our ordinariness. So this is our good shepherd. And as we carry on from that bit, so it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. And again, he's just kind of reminding them that maybe they've had what they thought were shepherds, quote unquote, that really weren't. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. And this image is quite a dark image, but the sense of actually danger is really real. And that whole thing of being a shepherd wasn't a nice, cushy job. There was real danger. We know from the story of David that he fought bears and lions. Like there was lives at risk. And the reality is life, there will be dark times. Like the sheep had to come back to this fold every night. There will always be night times. But Jesus, as the shepherd, is promising that in those night times, he will always be in that gateway, protecting us every time. And whether that's something that feels like it happens every day, or whether it's, you know, we've had a good spell and actually things are quite good, there will be night times. But Jesus promises to always be that shepherd. And I had a bit of a challenge, I guess, from God recently. And I realized that when I'm a bit tired or when I feel just a bit battered by life. I've had children up at 4 o'clock in the morning for far too long, and just life. That sometimes I back myself into a bit of a corner to kind of fight life. You know, when you can feel your thoughts just getting a bit negative, a bit down, and you're aware that you've got to do something about it. And I've got a picture, if we can get the next picture up. And I feel this was kind of the closest I could find to what I kind of had in my head. But for me, I felt like I kind of backed myself in a corner, so I'm ready to fight. I'm like, right, I've got to deal with this. I've got to get through this. I'm going to fight. And that sense of kind of, I guess you kind of, your back's against the wall. Well, at least if I'm here, nothing can get at me from behind, but I'm going to fight my way out. I'm going to claim those promises that God gives us, and I'm going to get through this. I'm determined to do this. And then I heard this quote, and I'm pretty sure it's Stephen Furtick. But I heard this, and it says, sometimes we are surviving when we have been called to conquer. Sometimes we are surviving when we have been called to conquer. And that really challenged me. Because I think a lot of the time I do that. I think, right, I can get through this, I can survive it. And God actually says, no, you can conquer this. Because Jesus says in John chapter 8, he says, if the Son sets you free, then you will be free indeed. Jesus doesn't offer us a partial freedom, a kind of, that'll do. That picture of the cave, you're in the cave, and there's light out there. It's not a bad picture. But actually, Jesus says, I have come to set you free, and you will be free indeed. And I think sometimes I'd kind of got into the habit of going, I know what my weaknesses are, and they'll always be my weaknesses, but I can fight for them. And, there will always be a battle there. But I can fight for it. But actually, if Jesus is promising that I am set free, then I'm free. Those battles don't always have to be battles that I will face. And I think that's true for all of us. Jesus can set us free. And like hearing Miguel and the guys this morning, they have been set free. I read a book the other week about a guy called Barry Woodward, who kind of similar sort of background, was a drug addict for years and years, in and out of prison, and there was no way out. And then he met Jesus, and it was Jesus that set him free. And I was kind of going, I want to see, is there a strategy? What do we need to be doing? How do we get Jesus into these? And actually, God goes, do you know what? This is me. Jesus sets us free, and that's as true for us as it is for someone who's struggling with a life-crippling addiction. This is exactly the same for us. Jesus sets us free of everything that you want him to. Psalm 118, verse 5 says this: when I was hard pressed, I cried to the Lord. He brought me to a spacious place. So I'm just going to read that again. It should be in your notes. So Psalm 118, when I was hard pressed, I cried to the Lord, and he brought me to a spacious place. And for some reason, I'd never come across that verse, or just not noticed it. I've read it before, but I've never really noticed it. And for me, that really challenged me. So when I back myself into a corner, that's not where God intends me to be. He intends us to be able to live in this place, this spacious place. God doesn't say, come to me and I'll kind of make you safe in some sort of shut away little hiding place. He says, come and I'll bring you into a spacious place. When things are hardest, when you cry to me, this is the place I will bring you into. And those were things that kind of come throughout the Bible. Psalm 23, a bit we probably all know really well. It says, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Again, we've got that beautiful image of a shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside beside quiet waters. Again, that image of just space. Even when things are hard, those are the places he will take us to, and he refreshes my soul. He knows what we need and where to take us. He knows what we need. And so often we think we know what we need. I had a night off the other evening, and I noticed there was a really interesting documentary, and it was on BBC, and it was all on, sounds really depressing, and you'll see a theme of what's going on in my head at the moment, but it was all about like drug use across the country. And I was like, oh, that'd be quite interesting. I've actually got a bit of space to learn some stuff and just see what it says. And I watched it, and it was just really depressing. And at the end of this evening, I thought that was my evening off, and I just feel really depressed by it all. And the whole of the next day, there was just this sense of, oh. And God really challenged me and said, actually, did you ask me what you needed that evening? That was your evening off. I knew what you needed, and you thought you knew what you needed. You thought, learning something would be good. I knew what you needed. And that real reminder, just in everything, Jesus knows what we need and where to take us to get it. Isaiah 55, there's this incredible invitation. Isaiah 55, verse 1 and 2, it says, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare." He invites us to come. And this isn't a kind of one-off sort of to meet with Jesus for the first time. We need food and, well, according to this, milk and wine. But I think it's kind of, we need food and drink every day. This is Jesus' invitation to us every day. Come to me. And then that phrase, you will delight in the richest of fare. This isn't like kind of meager rations. It's what is the best. What is really good. The Message version says it as this: "You will eat only the best and fill yourself only with the finest." Sounds a bit like a supermarket slogan somewhere. But you'll eat only the best. Fill yourself only with the finest. This is what Jesus promises us as we allow him to be the good shepherd, to lead us. Because the thing is, that image of the fold, that was the night time. They didn't stay there the whole time. If they'd stayed in there certainly wouldn't been of any kind of sense of fullness of life. It would have been a bit miserable. It's kind of like, when you get those battery chickens that are just kept in barns all day. Being in that little sheepfold forever wouldn't be fun, because the shepherd didn't keep them there. That was for safety. They then took them out to find the good stuff. And the thing about the good shepherds is they knew where the good stuff was. They knew the pastures that were the best for their sheep. And it's the same with Jesus. He knows what we need. He knows the best places. And as we come kind of towards the end of that bit of what Jesus is saying, verse 14 says, "I am the good shepherd." We've got that repetition of that phrase again. John wants us to get it. "I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father." Comes back to that knowing. And again, this isn't a kind of vaguely knowing about. The word here is the gnosko word, which means like know intimately. Jesus knows his sheep. He knows us as he knows the Father, and that's how he calls us to know him. It always comes back to knowing God, to that relationship with God. And then it goes on to say, "I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd." And I love that image of, as we get to know the voice, as we get to know our shepherd, as we get to know Jesus, actually it brings this real sense of unity. If we're truly listening to the shepherd's voice, there will be unity. And so often we've kind of seen that missed historically in churches and amongst Christians. We miss that unity. But if we are listening to God, then that will grow. And we see that happening in Gloucester, which is really exciting, because as we pray together and as we worship together, that grows naturally. I remember when I lived in Thornbury, I ended up for a few years having to be a part of Thornbury churches together, which was thrilling. And was often, so it was all the different churches all met together, and it was often fairly boring things that they'd talk about. But the really good bit was when we got to pray together, because actually all the differences of kind of how to do things were put to one side, because we were all focused on the same thing. We were all focused on Jesus. And that image of Jesus as the shepherd, as we follow him and listen to him, as he is the one who leads us, then differences don't matter, because we're focused on the same one. And I think one of the challenges for us is that it doesn't end there. Jesus is setting an example. He makes it very clear in this passage that the Pharisees are not doing a good job of being shepherds. And so the challenge is where, in the places where we are called to lead, where we are called to love people and look out for people, are we going to do a good job? And I was really struck by that idea of God bringing us into the spacious places, like the green pastures. How do we do that for people that we meet? Bringing them into those places of acceptance, of being loved and fed. We're not there to judge. And I think probably as a church, we're fairly good at that a lot of the time. We're not very quick to judge, and I love that. But just in day-to-day life, how do we do that? How do we bring people into a spacious place? And are we allowing Jesus to really be our shepherd? Allowing him to lead us, wherever that may be? Like kind of as we were doing, that song was talking about calling us out. If he calls us, are we prepared to go? What does that look like? Most of the time we don't know, because it's God's plan and not ours. But it's just allowing our plans to be put to one side and saying, God, you know what? It's your way. I think it was Miguel said this morning about if it wasn't his plan, but the door opens, then it probably means it's God. I love that. There's a door opening and it wasn't on my agenda of things to do, then could well be God. And just that sense of this is God's way, and God's way is best, because it comes back to that point that God is always good. He is the good shepherd. And I remember as a teenager being terrified of asking God what he wanted me to do, because I thought I wouldn't like it. I wanted what I wanted to do. And it doesn't work, does it? We've probably all been there when we try and do what we want to do. It doesn't work, because God is good and he has the best. Matthew 10 says this: whoever finds his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And the losing will kind of pale into insignificance when we find life with Jesus. So maybe if Joe and Emily, is Emily in here? No, we'll give her a few minutes. So we're going to just have a little bit of time together to finish. And just a couple of things that I kind of felt God was saying was firstly that thing about being free. How free are we? Are we kind of partially free? Have we sort of settled for, well, I know God set me free, and I'll deal with the kind of the rest? Actually, I really feel like Jesus wants to say tonight, you are free, completely free. You are free indeed. There's no strings attached. And then secondly, that if Jesus is being our shepherd, will we really follow where he leads? And the good thing is that even when we try and do it on our own way, he goes out with a big stick and hoiks us back in again. He doesn't ever leave us. But, yeah, so Joe and Emily, do you want to come up? And I'll just pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for who you are and that image of you as the good shepherd, both God and fully involved in the messiness of life. That you are there to protect us, to know us, to love us. And that, God, you know exactly what we need. And God, you know exactly what we need this evening. And Jesus, you are a God who speaks to us. You are a God who longs to be in relationship with us. And God, I pray that where there's things that we need to hear tonight, God, would we receive what you want to say? And Father, thank you that you have set us free. That Jesus, you willingly laid down your life so that we could be free. And Father, I pray that you would, by your Spirit, help us to step into that full freedom tonight. Thank you that you never do half a job. And God, thank you for that promise that where you've set us free, we are free indeed. And God, we want to claim that tonight for ourselves. But not just for ourselves, but God, for people who we long to see that for, whether it's friends or family or people we work with. God, your freedom breaking into their lives, because God, it's real and it's what you long for. And maybe just remember those images, that image of kind of being backed up in the cave. And you're kind of half there. There's a nice view out there. But your back's up against the wall. And actually God says, I want to take you out into the spacious land, into the green pastures. You are free.